I think what I mostly wanted to focus on was the great importance of vision and visionary experience in Sufism. Because we often talk about Sufism more in terms of love. And the only problem with that is things can also get a little mushy there. So it helps to know what Rumi means by love. And he means making way through love, meaning through surrender, to a highly enhanced form of perception. So his love is very far from the normal kinds of pleasure seeking that might exist in a love between like beings, let's say between two human beings, this is called metaphorical love, isn't it? Because you learn the ability to surrender, the ability to think more highly of another than oneself. That there's a lot of good tutoring and a lot of learning in what's called metaphorical love. But this is a different kind of love. And for Rumi, it must include vision, and a very specific kind of vision, which is God's vision. Well, this is the fun I was having with the talk called The Impersonal Existentialist, because it seems to be non sequitur. You've given, say, modern existentialism, where you do not have a Platonic essence, so to speak. You create your own essence, you see. You actualize, you self-actualize, you see. And there is some merit to that point of view, but the whole point of spirituality is to investigate these things. So coming back to the poem I was quoting earlier to Ashraf John, remember Rumi asks a question because he's weary of people talking about God, throwing the name around so easily. And he asks the question, he says, Hich nami be haqiqat didai, ya ze gaf ghulam gul gul chidai, اسم خواندی رو مسما را بجو مه به بالا دان نه اندر آب جو. So he starts this poem and he says, have you ever heard of a name that doesn't have an actuality to it? Or have you ever picked a rose from the letters R-O-S-E? You've said the name, why don't you go find what is being named? The moon is up above, you know. It is not the reflection in the water. So he's sometimes not exactly stern. He can be very stern sometimes, but he's definitely often asking challenging questions. So in this one, he says, Hamchu ahan ze ahani berang shav. Dar riyazat آینه به زنگ شو. گر ز نام و حرف خواهی بگذری پاک کن خود راز خود این یک سری. خویش را صافی کن از اوصاف خود تا ببینی ذات پاک صاف خود. This is a very important poem of his. So this last part he says, like iron, just like iron become without feature. See? In spiritual striving and spiritual focus, become a rust-free mirror. So he says, just like iron, become free from your ironness, in that you become featureless. You see? That's what he's trying to say. Now the next line, he says, if you want to get beyond the name of things, purify yourself from the self, meaning the ego self. Don't delay it. Don't delay. If you really are trying to find it, you better not delay. Purify yourself from the self. He says, purify the self of all self-referential features, in order that you may be able to see the pure and clear essence of the self. So his position is clearly the Buddhist perspective of what is your original face. You guys know in Zen Buddhism, one of the koans, what is your original face? This is not a paradox. He's asking a very real question. And he's asking this question of someone, the general who is overtaking Hui Neng. This is attributed to Hui Neng, the Sixth Patriarch. And like the killing of Shams, or certainly the attempt to murder Shams, the followers of the Fifth Patriarch have decided to kill the Sixth Patriarch. Sort of wonder, what were they thinking? They just spent years in meditation, trying to attain nirvana, and now they're off of a posse to try to kill the chosen successor. These are paradoxical behaviors when spirituality goes wrong. In any case, the general who catches up to Hui Neng, he's about to do some violence. But Hui Neng has put the cloak and the staff on a rock, and the general goes to grab it like, ha-ha, it's mine, and he can't even move the cloak from the rock. He cannot even move it. So he becomes terrified. Uh-oh. He's a bit terrified, and then he sees that Hui Neng has got a friendly expression, and he feels remorse, and he says, I've been such a fool. Forgive me. I don't know what happened. I was just trying to find myself. I don't know how things got to this point. Hui said, it doesn't matter. Stand there for a time, and without thinking of anything. Don't think of good and don't think of evil. Don't think of the past, don't think of the future. And then he adds to that after a time, he says, what is your original face? Well, isn't this like zikr? Where you, in other words, the science of Sufism is a very simple science. You get to verify things. And I was saying this morning to some of the Afghan friends, I said, your children, they may do the unthinkable. They may say, I don't believe in God. They're in Western schools, it's bound to happen. They're raised, no matter if they're in a religious household or in a secular environment. And what should we answer them? Say, I don't blame you. Why would you believe in something like that? Why believe in something when you can investigate it yourself? Good thinking. Son, daughter, good thinking. Don't believe in something like that. Find out if it's true or not. What else are we going to do? You want to argue with them, or you want to try to dissuade them? I doubt it will have much effect. But if you say, there is a science, an old science in the East and in the West, in the North and in the South, and in our land of Sufism, we deliberately, our whole purpose is to verify what we don't want to be at the mercy of belief. We want to know. And the Sufis say, yes, you can know. That's what Rumi's saying. He's saying, I'm tired of hearing you talking about something you don't know about. Let alone punishing other people because of what you don't know about. And And he's saying that there's a simple approach, and I find these kinds of poems, what I mean to say is I find them attitudinally very useful at the time of meditation or zikr. So when he says dissolve all of yourself in vision, all of this body, well, what do I bring to zikr? I bring maybe a tired body, maybe a hopeful body or hopeful soul, hopeful mind, but I've woken up, I've tried to awake, I've done my ablutions. Don't we understand the symbolism? Hopefully, maybe usually always I will do a ghusl for the group zikr, because I regard the group zikr as a major event. So that instead of wudu, I will do a ghusl. And why do a ghusl? Because ghusl means a ablution, full ablution, because then I can say, oh God, this water is only the water of this earth, but you have made it the true water. Please wash this body with the true water. I take this true water into my nose, and may I smell the fragrance of heaven from this nose. Wash my mouth, which has incessantly lied and manipulated and been wrongdoing, and may you purify, everything purified. See? So that we put ourselves in a frame of mind. But when we sit down, how useful to think what the Sufis say, and verified by all of the arrived Sufis, is you will enter a visionary plane, which initially is filled with more of you than it. So you will necessarily, if you shut out the world, you will either fall asleep. Now, if you fall asleep, you will also enter a visionary plane, maybe. You'll have a dream. And the people in the room, they're saying, oh, what's he saying? The dreamer is simultaneously in the room and having a dream. So they are in another realm. But we are aware, hopefully, that we are in the room, and when visionary experience arises, it can be it has so many possibilities, and the main thing is that initially we may encounter very personal kinds of visionary experience. Over time, for all of the Sufis, not to mention the Zen Buddhists and so forth, there's a disappearance of that kind of visionary experience. There's a lessening. There is a using up of that visionary experience. Another way you could put it is that if you travel through the domain of Malakut, you are now arriving in the plane of Jabarut. So you're arriving into a greater domain, which is about the active potentials of the divine names, manifesting in a world of states of great power and beauty and luminosity, but not so much with individual self-referential kinds of visions. This is the domain that Rumi's talking about, and in Lahut, finding one's source is no different than from God's side. Remember, it's when he says, "Fazkuruni azkurkum." So he says, if you remember me, I remember you. But it's a bit more active than that, huh? Meaning, it's not as simplistic as it sounds at first glance. Really, if you take the step of remembering me, I will be the one doing the remembering in you. That's really what he's saying there, according to Sufi experience and Sufi knowledge. In the case of, from God's point of view, when he says, Har ke andar vajhe ma bashad fana, kulu shay'in halikun نبود جزا. زان که در اعلاست او از لا گذشت، هر که در اعلاست او فانی نگشت. So Rumi is quoting God. He says, whoever becomes annihilated in my face does not have, as a result, this saying, everything is perishing except his face. هر که اندر بچه ما باشد فنا، کلو شیء هالک نبود جزا. زان که در الاس او از لا گذشت, because in the illah he has or she has transcended the law. Or if you think of his wordplay, there is law, and he says if you add the aleph to the law you get illah, and therefore you have transcended the law with illah. You see the wordplay? So, so he says, and whoever is in illah will not perish, cannot possibly perish. So again, this is from God's side. I'm saying that this is a reciprocal situation. On the human side, as we were saying, Rumi claims there's an essence. He says what you first see is not really yourself. You better work a little bit at this, getting this fog out of the way here. If you clear your own atmosphere up, you might see the sun. But your atmosphere is a bit of a problem, you see, for the seeing. Or in the mirror analogy, there's rust on the mirror. If you scrub the mirror, polish the mirror, it will be able to reflect the divine names. From the divine side, as I've just switched, he has said in this last thing I was quoting, there's a verse, Kulu shay'in halikun ala wajhahu. Everything is perishing except his face. He says, but this will not apply to the person who has actually become annihilated and sustained in his face. God doesn't have a face, does he? He can't have a face, except for the divine names. So this cannot be the God beyond the worlds. This has to be the divine names. So this understanding with regard to vision is that much of this experience of the Sufis is in the domain of what is perceived, and in the domain of what is ordinarily even described by God is not being perceived. لا تدرك الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار وهو لطيف الخبير. ومن أبصر قد جاءكم بصائر من ربكم ومن أبصر فلنفسه ومن عمي عليها. So we have many statements, but this one is rather interesting because he says their glances, they are not perceiving him. They're not able to grasp him. And he is seeing them looking, or he is perceiving they're looking towards him, you see, or he is within their glances, see, but more literally, he is watching them looking, you see. There have already come to you many sightings or many perceptions in the domain of seeing. Many visions, many visionary experience, many signs. Basaer is using here. This is all of the same root of Basar, and his divine name Basirat, etc. There's a relationship in all of this. There's already come to you many insights and many forms of witnessing. And whoever sees, it is for the benefit of their soul. And whoever is blind, it is against their soul, meaning this is going to go against them. So that from the divine side, everywhere, whether it's the verse I quoted earlier from Joseph, tell them, Muhammad, your path, what is your path? Sometimes the path has to do with love, but very often it has to do with insight, understanding, and insight having this particular meaning. We talked earlier a little bit about Suravadi Maktul. He was of the Ishraqi. So he founds a school that is based on, first of all, affirming the Platonic tradition, and also the earlier Iranian religious tradition, at least in its symbolism of the angels. Even though he's a devout Muslim and a practicing Muslim, he decides that this symbolism is useful. But he's called the Ishraqi because he's a master of illumination. And for him, these are not idle words. They are not metaphorical words. So again, we're adding to this tonight. See, tonight's topic, I guess we would say, is about the relationship of spiritual vision to grasping God's majesty and to attaining to eternal felicity. What is the state of the near ones, Muqarrabun? Are they wanting the fruits and the sofas in paradise? No, what is it that they want?
Sight, vision.
They want to see God. Okay, you're a religious person. Wouldn't you rather have that than the fruits and the sofa? I mean, you might settle for the fruits and the sofa, but it's going to get pretty boring after a while, unless you have Alzheimer's. Hopefully there's a merciful Alzheimer's. Can I taste that again? Thank you. Can I taste that again? Thank you. But, you know, this unless there's a merciful Alzheimer's, and every new creation is a new moment of non-remembering of the last moment, it's going to be rather tedious, isn't it? In any case, it's going to fall short of seeing God's face. So, the height of Sufi understanding and the height of Sufi experience is none other than in this world to have cash rather than credit, they say. Credit is you're going to take it in the other world, huh? And you sell everybody out, sell everything but your nafs, huh? Or hopefully you can sell your nafs and get there. But the Sufis are rather skeptical about this approach, and they would agree with the modern secularists and say, you know, I don't know if I can believe that fully. I'll tell you I believe it, but privately I have my doubts. And the Sufi says, let's investigate this. So this whole issue of seeing and what the diverse levels and meanings of seeing, don't imagine for a moment that they are speaking symbolically or metaphorically, because we see very clear explanation in Suravadi Maktul, where he's describing, he says, first of all, why are you using such a clumsy word as wujud when you can just use the word light? All the mystics, they're going to see light. Why don't you surrender to God says his name is light? Why don't you just surrender to this and to allow this light to expand in you to where you no longer are aware of your small light? So the path of the Sufi in this view may seem a little different than what we normally expect from Rumi, which is love, but in fact it's not different from the path of love. Because at its deepest level, love brings us into a state of complete awe. And what could be more awesome than to be without the self in a luminous world of God's self-manifestation? What could be more awesome than that? Classical usage or modern usage of awesome, see? So we have, what time is it now?
6:34.
Yeah, so maybe it will go just a few more minutes and then we do the prayer and then I'll take off. But I want to finish this poem, but we still have time. Did any other questions come up or observations in the meantime? Yes.
The hadith of Nawafat?
Nawafel.
Nawafal.
Yeah.
What is that?
My servant does not cease to approach me.
Right, okay.
With Nawafel.
Yeah.
Better thought of as excessive devotion, excessive love.
Right.
Until I love him, or obviously her.
Yeah.
Now this is a very interesting hadith because it's shocking really because there's a causality established that God does as he wills after all. He leads astray whom he wills, he guides whom he wills. But in this hadith he establishes that love in him for the servant grows when the servant's love grows. Because one does not perform, either one's doing it out of pure egotism and greed and fear of the afterlife. What he means by the servant is one who is sincerely doing these, you see. Because here he's using abd in the technical sense. Someone who is truly a servant and has the attitude of a servant. So he says, until I love him or her, and when I love him or her, I become the ears through which he or she hears by me, by God, or the eyes through which, and so here is the one about the eyes. So it's very common. The sight being actually very powerful in Islam itself, meaning when we think of the order of the senses, the ears comes first because the ears has a rather technical meaning here, however. Because, yes?
So, between the light and the love, it seems to me that one is good for Tuesday and one is good for Thursday.
One is what?
One is good for Tuesday and one is good for Thursday. And by that I mean, I've been contemplating the Tawheed of our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
That we have multiple states of being and multiple experiences of presence.
Mm-hmm.
And only by the unconditional acceptance of each of these states do we arrive at the Tawheed of self.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it seems to me that on some days, the light will be of most assistance, and some days the love will be. Trust me, I do both of them all the time. You know, always sending love and light. But I'm just saying, I like the location of Rumi and Sukhawardi as, you know, sort of a way to invoke an awareness and, you know, a communion with the divine, with Azad.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me that on some days the light works, and on some days the love works.
Yeah, so this is an important observation that if we are following a comprehensive path, let's say the path of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, then he runs through this cycle by pointing out to, and saying to God in gratitude, you have made three things beloved to me in this world of yours. The intimacy, the human intimacy, summarized here as the women. So if you're women, you would say the man or whoever your beloved is. The human intimacy, the perfume of spirituality that joins domains and that gives fragrance to the human intimacy or the spiritual intimacy. And the solace of my eyes is in the prayer. And so in this statement, Muhammad says, I am the one who is joining the realms, and I am present for any manifestation of Kullu Yawmin Huwa Fi Shan. Every day he is on a different expression, and we know, as Amina says, that not every day do we feel the same or do we have the same experience. So we would be untrue to ourselves and untrue to others if we pretended we were not living simultaneously at these different levels. The levels, we could use the common designation, Nasut, Malakut, Jabarut, Lahut, the domain of the earthly domain, the domain of the imaginal, the world in between, where the senses and the higher meanings take on forms either in our minds or in our dreams, sometimes more like the higher world, sometimes more like the earthly world. The world of the potentials of the names manifesting, and our ultimate source, which would be Lahut. But in fact, if a person is grounded, they should always be true to the state they're in, is the way I would put it. So let's say that because of the changes, whether you decide they're because of you or your cycles or God in fact changing on a different articulation, wisdom there is in invoking the divine name of the moment. And if I have lost my footing and been, like I ask you, you're having the most sublime conversation with someone, and barefooted, you snub your toe badly on the edge of their table, which happens to be square-legged. What happens to your philosophical conversation? Isn't it true that body and nerve endings draw you into a world of pain where it may result in not just pain, but either anger or grief? If it's a child, the child may start crying. If it's a person, they may lose their philosophical stability and throw the table aside, or God knows what they will do, but at the very least it pulls us from our perspective into another perspective. You're driving on the freeway, such a spiritual day, such a spiritual perspective. Somebody cuts in front of you. Uh-oh. Does anybody get irritated? Some people get irritated, I'm led to believe. Most of us at some point get irritated, right? Somebody kind of cuts you off, or even maybe you get scared. Maybe they're like after you because they think you cut them off, or whatever it is. But driving on the freeway is you need to be at a certain level of attention. You can't be in the clouds at that point, can you? So there's a lot of, the wisdom of Shu'aib, for example, in Ibn Arabi, is that the heart is capable of adapting to the changes as quickly as possible, and it might take us from awe to istighfar, to asking for forgiveness. Or on a more positive note, as Amina points out, there could be sublime spiritual experiences, and it just so happens that on one day, God happens to be more in a loving mode, or at least that light of his is shining more strongly on a person, and God says in Hadith, I am Wadud, and who is going to manifest my name Wadud? Well, maybe Amina Wadud, you see. So, you see what I mean? It will be dependent on the state I'm in, which name I should invoke. And by invoke a name, I think it's fake to just choose a name to invoke. Why not invoke the name that is actually the present moment through your state? See, so you might actually say the word, but why not just let it be what it is? But it's a wisdom to understand that we cannot demand these states of vision. See, I think that's the thing. These are very true and very real. In Sufism, we try to balance people's perspective. And let's say people have been reading too much about God's wrath. We try to talk about God's mercy. Let's say they've been reading too much about God's love, because there's a lot of sappy stuff out there too about God's love, isn't there? And that's okay. But we want to balance this out to understand that this is a kind of love that is insightful. Meaning it doesn't the insight doesn't necessarily dominate. It may be the lovingness that dominates in one moment and the insight that dominates in another moment. I believe that's what Amina is trying to say, that we're different states at different times, and we don't need to actually favor one over the other one. We need to experience what is true for us. But taking that further, Amina, so if you therefore, what about if you entered a period of constriction or sadness? Would you also, what would you do then? Or anger, what would you do in that scenario?
I still think that you have to start with unconditional acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
But the way to have any vision or perspective outside of the pain of the grief or the pain of the toe,
Mm-hmm.
the way to be able to do that then is to remain open to what manifests. So if it manifests in light, then that's the ride. Take it, to heaven. So if it manifests in love, then that's the ride.
Yes, so you see the key point, I think, in this statement is being a Muslim does not just mean that one surrenders to God, that one surrenders to reality, to the moment. So for Westerners, very good, we would say unconditional acceptance. But in our own religious perspective, we would say, well, yes, I strive to be more of a Muslim, more of a surrenderer, which I would have unconditional acceptance, and then maybe I would find, even for in my case, I would find that I'm really not eligible in this moment for anything except maybe patience, or maybe seeking refuge. See, I may find myself drawn to places of safety and security, and that may then lead me hopefully out of this. So whatever it is, though, I agree with Amina's assessment that unconditional acceptance. This is also not that you would act on anything, but rather that you would surrender to the actuality of what you're feeling. You wouldn't suddenly necessarily, if it was anger, you would at least have to accept that. I would have to accept that I'm feeling angry at this person. That doesn't mean I need to do anything severe about that. But I do need to accept that I'm feeling angry, or I do need to accept that I'm feeling sad. And then from there, if I'm a Muslim, I've surrendered to what's happening in me, and I don't need to attack anyone necessarily. Maybe if they're attacking a child on the street, I do actually have to attack them. But I'm saying in most cases it would be better not to attack. So, anyway, I appreciate this feedback from our friend Amina, and what I would like to do is I'm just going to finish this last part of this poem for you, and then say the prayer, and then with your permission go off to see my mother. And where we left off, as you recall in the English, is dissolve the whole of your body in seeing. Travel in vision, go within vision, only vision. One sight sees a short distance of the road. Another sees both worlds and the king's face. The difference between these is immeasurable. Seek his mascara, for Allah knows the secrets. Now, what's this business about the mascara or the kul? It's a little bit hard for a Westerner to understand this, but it is easy for someone living in the bright sun of the desert, for example, to understand what they're talking about. What are they talking about here? Why do they put the kul on the eyes?
To deflect the sun.
To what?
Deflect the sun.
Yeah, because it's so bright that one is blinded. there's kind of a balance between being overwhelmed by the brightness of the sun and being able to stand the intensity of the sun and to see the other things as they manifest. And so the idea, it's come to represent vision in general. So this word kol, surma, is intended to represent vision. And that's why Basere jam jam unga nazar tavane kad ke khak maikada kol basar tavane kad. For example, from Hafiz, you will attain to the secret of Jamshid's world-revealing cup the moment that you make the dust of the wine shop your mascara. Basere jamajan unga nazar tavani kad ki hak maikada kol basar tavani kad. There's innumerable lines of Persian poetry and Arabic poetry about the role of the mascara. In this case, it's not for ornament, it has a practical function, and it's therefore come to represent true seeing. And so the seeing permeates all of the Sufi poetry. I remind you, this is not simply the domain of Rumi or Suravardi. It's all of Sufism has, one way or another, presented the importance of spiritual vision. So I think we left off there. Except we added the line, you've now heard of the sea of non-being, so keep trying that you may attain to it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to far enough down this poem that I can finish it. So I'm going to skip a little intermediary passage from here. So he says, Pas zedard aknun shekayat bar madar kuust suye nisti asbi rahwar in qadar guftim baki fikr kon fikr agar جامد بود رو ذکر کن ذکر آرد فکر را در اهتزاز ذکر را خورشید این افسرده ساز اصل خود جذب است لیکن ای خواجتاش کار کن موقوف آن جذبه مباش زان که ترک کار چون ناز بود ناز کی در خوردن جانبازی بود نه قبول اندیش نه رد ای غلام امر را و نهی را می بین مدام مرغ جذبه ناگهان پرد ز هوش چون بدیدی صبح شمع اونگاه بکش مقبول هستم؟ چشم ها چون شد گذاره نور اوست مغز را می‌بیند او در عین پوست بیند اندر ذره خورشید بقا Binad andar khatra kul bahar ra. Very pretty, huh? This lines of Rumi. So here he says, we've said this much. Think on the rest of it. If your thinking is frozen, then invoke spirit. So here I've said invoke spirit, meaning do the zikr if your thinking is frozen. Very useful advice. Invocation brings thinking into vibrant expression. Make invocation a sun for that frozen reflection. Spirituality is from divine attraction, but strive, friend, don't rely on attraction. Avoiding your work is like putting on airs, and how can that attitude release us from the self? Don't fret over what is or isn't acceptable. Continue to observe what is and isn't permissible. Suddenly, attraction's bird will fly from the nest. When you see the dawn's light, blow out the candle. When the eyes are piercing, know it's his light. That light sees kernels in the very husks. It sees eternity's sun in an atom. It sees all of the ocean in a drop. So there's a segment in between there, but it's a very beautiful ending of this whole passage that I think is a very, very true statement, that if my thinking is in any way stalled, if I do zikr, my thinking will become stronger and more versatile and more capable of understanding things. This is not true at the beginning, because maybe at the beginning we're doing zikr and we're actually having trouble, and beginners often complain of cloudiness of their thinking. But consider what Rumi says is your thinking, your ability to reason, to understand will become stronger if you do the zikr. And he says your thinking will come into vibrant expression from this. He talks about spirituality is from divine attraction. Yes, but strive, don't rely on the attraction, because avoiding your work and the work of spiritual focus, spiritual exercise is like putting on airs. Huh? Who are you to put on airs? He says. And how can that attitude release us from the self? He pauses to remind us that we are in an Islamic tradition, and he says, but just don't spend all of your time fretting over what's acceptable and unacceptable. Focus on developing your spirituality. Suddenly, attraction's bird will fly from the nest, meaning fly out of the nest of your heart. You will see it manifest. Huh? When you see the dawn's light, blow out the candle. You don't need the candle of your own small awareness at that point. When the eyes are piercing, this we come back to the hadith now, huh? No, it's his light. That light sees kernels in the very husks. It sees eternity's sun in an atom. It sees all of the ocean in a drop. The last thing I would say tonight is remember the verse I often like to quote to you. He says, he's described the world of the senses very much like in the Upanishads as a situation of a chariot with horses. And certainly he's here speaking directly about horses and their beauty and their power and their sensuality, really, when you think of horses, how amazing they are to look at, and the way they're very full expression of instinct. Sui hesi rao ki nurish ra kebas. Hes ra an nur niku sahib ast. Nur hes ra nur haq tazyin بود معنی نورون علی نور این بود. So this is another section in Masnavi where he's trying to clarify his understanding. This is the shortest tafsir I know of light upon light. Because most of the tafsirs of light upon light, they're really quite extensive and detailed, but Rumi decides to summarize it in this way. He says, go with that sense within you, meaning one of these golden senses, that the divine light is its rider. So the divine light is go. You have a sense inside of you that is like a horse for that divine light. Okay, sui hesirao he nurish yani nur baraye u rakebas. Hes ra an nur niku sahebas. And for that special internal sense of yours, that beautiful, majestic light is its master. The light of the senses is enhanced and beautified by that light. Nur hesra, nur haq tazin buvat. And the meaning of light upon light is precisely in this. So if you're trying to understand light upon light, he's saying there's a visual representation of Allah, meaning upon. And just as a rider can be upon a horse, and therefore there is a divine light here that is upon a divine sense given to the human being, clearly blown into the human being and belonging to the divine, called spirit. And so you're looking for this sense inside of yourself, he says. He says, go in the direction of that sense. Abandon these outer senses and go and find this internal sense. Because in Sufism and in Islam, these are, the transcendental experience is it has its limits. I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known, by definition, requires a polarity and a duality, and you are there for that purpose, according to that metaphysics. So yes, transcendentalism, tanzi, is a purification, fana is a tanzi, but it is not the objective of Sufism. So the objective of Islam and of Sufism is love and Tawheed. Tawheed having both the sense of the perception of the individual as of unification, and the love is the overwhelming awe and feeling that one has immersed in what God has described as ulfat and uns and hub. Familiarity, intimacy, and love. So both of these is Tawheed. And in this, tonight, we are looking at this dimension of the visionary capacity and the visionary relationship to this.